Tonight on KQED Newsroom, California Congress members Barbara Lee and Eric Swalwell talk with us about the historic second impeachment of President Trump and the troubling rise of white nationalism. Also, mass vaccination sites are beginning to open in California, and some regions are rolling back lockdown restrictions. We talk with state epidemiologist Dr. Eric Swalwell about efforts to expand vaccine distribution. Plus, presidents and plagues have come and gone, but these California redwoods have endured for centuries. We visit the ancient giants for this week's look at something beautiful. Welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Priya David Clemens. President Donald Trump has certainly made his mark on the office, accomplishing what no other U.S. president has managed to do. He's been impeached not once, but twice. Joining me now by Skype to discuss the impeachment and this week's biggest political stories are two members of KQED's Politics and Government team, Scott Shafer and Marisa Lagos. Thank you both for joining us. Marisa, once again this week I found myself frequently using words like historic and unprecedented. How are you describing this week's events?
I mean, the same. I think what's actually most shocking about this week are the details we've learned about that insurrection on the Capitol last week. How much more serious it could have been if not for the quick action of some law enforcement. And then, of course, I think noting that we did have 10 Republicans in the House peel off and vote to impeach Trump. Even Kevin McCarthy has had some harsh words. Mitch McConnell seems open to impeachment. So it does feel like the ground is moving fast. But given how serious things were last week, it's almost amazing that it hasn't gone further with the Republican Party, honestly.
Scott, what stood out to you?
You know, everything Marisa said I agree with. There was a photo in the New York Times this week that really struck me, and it was a picture of National Guardsmen who were in the Capitol to provide security, and they were all sort of on the floor, sleeping mostly, and they were huddled around a bust of George Washington. And I thought that image really captured the history of our country and the reminder that George Washington, as the first president, really established this idea of not running for a third term, or establishing a peaceful transition. And that's something that was very much, I think, at stake, you know, in everything we've been seeing in Washington. And so it really, I thought, just the history of this. And I remember being a young kid watching the Watergate hearings. And I think of the young folks today who are watching this unfold. And what are they going to remember? What are they going to take away?
Yeah, it is one of those moments in history, one of those inflection points. Marisa, you mentioned the 10 Republican members of Congress who broke with their party to vote for impeachment. One of them was from California. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, David Valadao just won back his seat. He had lost 2 years ago. Very purple district, more Democrats, actually. This is a Central Valley district. I think, you know, that he has always been a little bit more cautious. Of course, he wasn't in office for 2 years of Trump's term, so we don't fully know how he would have, you know, acted during that time. I was a little surprised to see that no other Republicans went along in California. But, you know, I do think that Valadao has his pulse on that district and its needs. And, you know, we could see more of that moving forward with other Republicans, quite frankly.
And Scott, you did some other reporting about the House Minority Leader, another Californian, Kevin McCarthy. He seems to be walking a pretty fine line here. How's that going for him?
Well, it is difficult. I mean, he's been one of President Trump's staunchest allies. In fact, the president has called him my Kevin. That's worked really well for him in the past 4 years. But as the ground is shifting, it's much more of a challenge. We saw Liz Cheney, another member of the House Republican leadership, peel off and say she's voting for impeachment. I mean, the thing that McCarthy has to do is juggle his caucus. I mean, right now it's a pretty staunchly pro-Trump caucus, and he has to keep those members in the fold. But also, if he's going to become speaker in 2 years, he's got to have a more diverse caucus that can peel off more of those Democratic seats. And so the question for him is, can he maintain that support from the pro-Trump loyalists, but also, you know, be seen as a leader who can have a broader tent, you know, as the speaker potentially, but now as the minority leader.
You know, I thought it was really fascinating to see Liz Cheney take that stand this past week. I covered her dad, Vice President Cheney, when I was a cub reporter in Washington, D.C. Marisa, where do you see the Republican Party going from this? How do you see it falling apart, coming back together, reforming?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell at this point. I really do think we're at an inflection point. I think the way that the impeachment is handled in the Senate is going to make a difference in that. Liz Cheney has kind of stuck her neck out at this point, and I think she sees herself as part of those establishment Republicans, the McCains of the world, who have really tried to walk the line Scott's talking about, but felt like last week was a breaking point. I'm not sure yet. We have members of QAnon in Congress, so it's really a hard moment for Republican leaders, and I think what Trump does, what his next move is going to be part of how things play out for her and Kevin McCarthy and others.
And moving back here to California, Scott, the Gavin Newsom recall effort, Democratic leaders were calling it a coup this week, referring to what's happening in D.C. Seems pretty different.
It does. They're trying to, of course, remind people that some of the same people, like Kevin McCarthy, who supported the challenge to the Electoral College, are very much involved in the recall. You're right, it is a bit of a stretch. On the other hand, the Republican Party in California is very unpopular statewide. And so I can understand they're trying to make that connection between what's happening in Washington with the recall. But the recall is not going to be on the ballot if it makes it for quite some time. And I think the political environment at that moment will be unpredictable.
All right, Scott Shafer and Marisa Lagos, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
California lawmakers have been front and center through the impeachment proceedings. Our next guests both say President Donald Trump is a continuing danger to the United States and should be removed from office immediately. Let's listen to what they had to say on the floor of the House of Representatives before they cast their votes for impeachment.
Donald Trump has been and remains a threat to our national security and our democracy, and wholly unfit to serve as president. He and his supporters must be held accountable for inciting violence against the government of the United States.
Our president incited our citizens to attack our capital. America was not attacked in the past sense. This president has inspired future plots. America is still under attack, and that's why Donald Trump must be impeached.
Joining us now by Skype from Washington, D.C. are California Congress members Barbara Lee and Eric Swalwell, both Democrats. Thank you for joining us. Congressmember Swalwell, you are a member of the House impeachment team, the impeachment managers. What sort of a danger do you think the president poses during these final days in office?
Well, thanks for having me on, and it's an honor to be on with my neighbor, Barbara Lee. This is an ongoing threat that we face as a country, a threat to life. As we saw, lives were lost in the Capitol last week, and a threat to our Constitution and this experiment of self-governance. So every hour that he stays in office is a threat. That's why we voted to impeach him. That's why we believe the Senate should remove him as soon as possible. These threats weren't only they didn't just come the day of. He called these individuals to Washington. He lit the match that set in motion the attack on the Capitol, and there are future plots in place right now to attack the Capitol again. And so it's a very imminent situation here, and we can't do enough to see him out of office.
Congressmember Lee, it appears the Senate won't be voting on impeachment next week and that Donald Trump will serve out the remaining days of his term. What danger are you worried about specifically as he's in office over the next week?
Sure, glad to be with you, and I'm happy to be here with my friend, Congressman Eric Swalwell, who is, of course, one of our impeachment managers, and I'm so excited that Alameda County will be presenting these articles of impeachment. Let me tell you, my background is psychiatric social work. So I'm a clinical social worker by profession, psychotherapist. I worry about this mental state that this president not only is in now, but what he has been in and who he is, just in terms of his character, his personality, and all of the issues that behavioral scientists and mental health professionals understand. So I worry that at this moment, given the fact that he's being backed into a corner, and given the fact that he knows that he lost this election, and he's in total denial, he's delusional, and I worry that, of course, he has his finger on the black box. You know, I'm certain that our military officials are making sure that he doesn't do anything crazy. But we have to be concerned that, anything is possible. We saw him incite violence. There was an attempted coup on the Capitol. Our speaker was targeted for assassination. The vice president was targeted for hanging. And in fact, members of Congress were targeted for assassination. And so these are very dangerous times, and he needs to get out as quickly as possible. Having said that, the Senate needs to move quickly. They need to move quickly to convict, because he is presents a present danger in and out of office, and he's a national security threat.
Congressmember Swalwell, how are you and the other impeachment managers planning to convince Senate Republicans to convict the president?
Well, first, there's just an imminency here of everyone's safety, and also, as I said, the continuity of this experiment in self-governance. If they're not going to bring a trial before the president leaves office, then we will still be ready to convict him post-presidency, because there are still consequences, not allowing him to have a taxpayer-funded pension or taxpayer-funded security detail that spends money at his golf courses, or being able to run for public office again. But the ball's really in the Senate court right now. We believe there's an imminency here, and we want them to move quickly.
I want to change directions now and step back a week to the insurrection. Congressmember Lee, could you tell us what you experienced on the day of the siege?
I looked down and saw a note saying that these people were in these seditionists really were in Statuary Hall, and then within a few minutes, the security personnel, Capitol Police, told us we may have to hit the floor. Well, we know what Donald Trump has been doing, and his hostile rhetoric for the last 5 years, his efforts to incite violence at his rallies, and what the chatter was up until through the last 3 or 4 weeks. And we also know what the white supremacists were planning. And having understood this, I wore my tennis shoes that day because I knew something was going to go down. I just knew it. And so I am just appalled that the preparation wasn't in place, and that our law enforcement officials and those in power and entrusted in terms of our security did not know this. And I knew it. Why didn't they know it?
Congressmember Lee, you've said some rioters expressed racism as they entered. What do you know about that? What did they say or do?
I have talked to many Black Capitol Police officers. I've had issues in the past in terms of security, so I know a lot of the Black officers, and they, quite frankly, were overwhelmed. They did a phenomenal job. All of the Capitol Police officers did. It was the command that was totally irresponsible in preparation, and thank goodness they've been fired. But the Black Capitol Police officers told me many times they were called the N-word. One guy said at least 15 times. Here you saw the Confederate flag being brought into the Capitol. A noose was out there hanging. And what the Black police officers told me was that they were fighting to protect us, they were fighting to protect the building, and they were in combat with white supremacists for a couple of hours, and that they were being challenged and harassed and threatened at the same time they were trying to protect. So they had to protect themselves also as they were trying to protect everyone else.
Congressmember Swalwell, what about you? What was your experience that day? And did you also either witness or hear about any of those racist attitudes?
I was sitting right next to Barbara when it all unfolded. And Barbara and our other colleague, Sherry Bustos, we were sharing with each other some of the alerts we were seeing on our phones, some of the streams that were coming in on Twitter. Next thing I know is Barbara said, we're taking out a gas mask and being told to get ready to duck. And I don't know if you remember, Barbara, the chaplain went up to the podium where the president usually speaks from at the State of the Union, and she offered a prayer. And that's the point where I realized this is not good. We've got a gas mask, we're being told to duck, and now a prayer is being offered. This is, certainly not a protected Capitol. The Capitol's fallen, essentially. And that's what's most unsettling, is that a place that is supposed to be a symbol to the world of democracy was attacked on a day that we were performing this constitutional duty. We had to leave for 6 hours. They were able to take over the Capitol for 6 hours before we were able to come back. That's what the president incited. And yes, I have heard from colleagues and Capitol police officers about the comments that were made. One officer relayed that there were, among the terrorists who had stormed the Capitol, off-duty police officers and off-duty military members who were flashing their badges and their ID cards as they were ransacking the Capitol, as if their whiteness gave them a privilege to do something that no Black Lives Matter protester would have been given license to do, to enter the Capitol or get that close. And this was a Black officer who had shared this, and you can just imagine how he felt about that.
Congressmember Swalwell, how concerned are you about the rise of white nationalism in the nation and potentially in California as well?
We've been warned. The FBI director told the Judiciary Committee that it's the greatest domestic threat to our country, and Barbara Lee and I have both seen that threat come to Alameda County when a federal police officer was murdered. I believe it was Officer Underwood, who was murdered in Oakland by a radical right-wing white nationalist group. So I just was reassigned with Barbara's support to the Homeland Security Committee to make sure that this is a top priority in the Biden administration, take on and defeat white nationalism.
Congressmember Lee, as your colleague just said, we know the FBI says the most significant terrorist threat to the United States is the threat from violent white supremacists. What else needs to be done to address that growing danger?
Well, as I know and said, and I think Eric just mentioned, he's on the Homeland Security Committee, and I hope that finally in this new administration that the Biden administration, Department of Homeland Security works with Eric and the committee members to really equate domestic terrorism as dangerous and international terrorism, because it is. As a Black American woman, I understand and know what domestic terrorism is. And I don't think this administration has prioritized the dangers. And unfortunately, now our international adversaries see how vulnerable we are, and we allow domestic terrorism to really almost topple our democracy.
Congresswoman Lee, you've been an advocate for equality for decades now. You've been serving in Congress since 1998. We now have a Black and Indian woman becoming vice president, breaking a lot of glass ceilings. We also had a Black man as president for 8 years before President Trump. How do you explain the rise of Black people in power alongside the rise in white supremacy?
First, we've made a lot of progress, and seeing now our sister from Oakland, California, and Berkeley, California, become our vice president is a major deal. It's historic, and it's important because we see this rise of white nationalism and white supremacy. At the same time, we see the country understanding that equal opportunity and breaking glass ceilings is absolutely part of our democracy and needs to happen. And so you have this Donald Trump agenda. He came in with the white supremacist agenda into the White House, and he's been building the support for white supremacy and white nationalism throughout his tenure. So now they're organized as we move forward with the majority of people in our country understanding the importance of having a Black and Indian woman in the White House as vice president.
We are moving into a new administration. We've got a new 4-year term with President Biden. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, first, what is top of your agenda?
Well, of course, working with the Biden administration and the House and Senate to develop legislation and funding priorities to crush this virus in terms of the health and economic impacts is number one for myself. When you look at the disproportionate rates of Black and brown people, communities of color being devastated by COVID-19, the economic and health impacts, we've got to do this. People are living on the edge. People are dying. We've got to make sure that this virus is crushed.
Representative Swalwell.
Yeah, crush the virus, open our schools, our churches, and our communities, but also recognize the economic toll this has taken, especially on, service sector workers, people, who are out of work right now. It really is a K-shaped recovery, and recognizing that that lower part of the K is going to need to be lifted up, and so passing stimulus for those folks. But of course, taking on voting rights and gun safety. I ran for Congress to address gun safety. Members of Congress were ducking and covering like our kids do in school every single day. And if that doesn't motivate you when you experience a workplace violence event to want to do something to make sure no one has to do that wherever they work, wherever they go to school, I don't know what will.
Can I just add to that? We've got to, just as a priority in general, address systemic racism and dismantle racism and repair the damage and move forward and build policies based on racial justice and equity across the board in our government.
All right, Democratic U.S. House Representatives Barbara Lee from Oakland, Eric Swalwell from Castro Valley, thank you both for your time.
Thank you, Priya.
Following a slow start in rolling out the COVID-19 vaccine, California has ramped up its distribution this week. The state is opening multiple mass vaccination sites in sports arenas and event spaces. It's also following new CDC guidance to vaccinate more broadly. In addition to healthcare workers, those most at risk from the virus, seniors age 65 and older, can start getting the vaccine. Still, most of the state remains under strict shelter-in-place orders as hospitals continue to battle a surge in coronavirus cases. Joining us now by Skype from Richmond is Dr. Eric Swalwell, state epidemiologist and deputy director of the State Center for Infectious Disease. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Swalwell.
Thank you so much for having me.
According to the CDC, California has only given out about 1/3 of the doses we've received, which is one of the worst rates in the country. What is going wrong with our vaccine distribution in California?
So I think there's a few things going on. I do think it's taken both other parts of the country and ourselves a little time to ramp up. And I think what we're learning, over the last several days and really focusing on this is that we really do think more vaccines have been administered than what we're seeing in the reports. And we're really ramping up, making sure that vaccine data is being entered. There is also a time lag, certainly for sometimes it takes 2 or 3 days for that data to be entered. I think there are a lot of these mass vaccination sites that you just mentioned that have been planned and take a little bit of planning that are happening now literally this week and moving forward. So it's taken a lot of our partners across the state as far as multi-county entities, we call them, of health systems and local health departments to really gear up these large vaccination sites. And, you need to have a core amount to set those up and be able to get that into people.
Well, last week, Governor Newsom pledged to inoculate another 1 million people by today, Friday. And at least according to the data we have right now, it appears we're falling well short of that goal. Can you tell me a little bit more about why that is?
So again, we think there's a data lag between getting sort of the data entered into a couple different systems. There's an inventory system that's national, and then we have a statewide system and a couple other decentralized systems. So we do think in the next couple days that we will have more data, and we know we're over 70% as of yesterday, and there's a lot of mass vaccination clinics happening today. So I think there is a data lag, and again, a lot of ramping up has happened over the last couple weeks, and certainly this week.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying you do think that we're going to hit that 1 million inoculation goal potentially by today. We just don't have the data that supports that yet.
I think that's what we're hoping. Again, more and more as we find out, there's, in many places they're having to actually do manual data entry to enter all their doses administered. And as we've talked to more and more people who have the vaccine, they have actually been administering it. So we've been doing a lot of catch up over this week and hoping over the weekend we'll really get better data.
Where do you stand on your thinking about resources? Do we have enough vaccine to get it into everybody who's eligible right now? And is there enough coming? We've just learned that the federal government does not have an additional stockpile, which we were expecting to receive additional doses from.
So I think we have known on this level, as far as the direct communications we're getting, about the limited vaccine supply. So currently in California, we know we have, what we call in the first phase with healthcare workers and long-term care facilities and nursing homes, there's over 3 million persons in that category. And we've only gotten a little bit over that shipped to California. So we know that there's limited vaccine supply, but we also know that different areas are in different places. So we wanted to make sure there's flexibility. Some places have really moved through offering to all their healthcare workers and nursing homes and are ready to start vaccinating the over 65, which is the next highest priority. And others are still working through that. So again, there's variation in different areas in our diverse state, and we're continuing to ramp up capacity so that as supply increases, we will be able to provide vaccinations more effectively and efficiently.
Why are we struggling so much after we've had months of warning that the vaccine would be coming and that we would need to distribute it?
Yes, I think there are a lot of different factors at play. Certainly, when vaccines started coming was in the midst of our worst surge, where we were seeing 3 times the numbers of cases we had seen in our last surge in the summer, where we were already getting close to overwhelming our healthcare systems. So, again, our healthcare systems were overwhelmed, as were our local health departments. So it came in the middle of that, and I think a lot of our traditional vaccinators were really busy pivoting to taking care of really critically ill patients. So I think that's a huge part of it. And there were just a lot of complexities around ramping up, planning for these large vaccination clinics, and also knowing, for example, that you really need to observe people and physically distance for 15 to 30 minutes after doses, things like that, that just really take longer to administer and get smooth processes going.
Some California counties are beginning to reopen their economies. Is it possible that they could close back down again, or are they open for good now?
That is a great question and a crystal ball question, but I do think we are very cautiously optimistic about the trends we are starting to see. We, of course, had huge concerns about the post-holiday bumps, and we did see some small increases, both right after Christmas and right after New Year's. But we are seeing some encouraging signs as far as hospitalizations stabilizing or decreasing in different areas of the state, and our case rates do seem to be stabilizing. So we are hopeful that they will be on the decline, and that as we get people vaccinated, we'll be able to move through this and get beyond this pandemic.
I want to speak specifically about the businesses that are struggling out there and this question of reopening outdoor dining. Has there been any evidence linking the spread of the virus to outdoor dining?
So I think it's important to know that especially when there's widespread transmission and case rates as high as they have been across California, that people can be infected anywhere. We know that the highest risk is indoors and lower risk is outdoors, but people can be infected in outdoor settings as well. And, again, we were really trying to educate everybody about the highest risk and the lowest risk. So the highest risk is indoors with no ventilation. It is certainly lower risk outdoors, but people can still absolutely be infecting each other in those different settings, especially close face-to-face contact. If there's a super spreader, that can certainly happen in many different settings, including outdoors.
Dr. Eric Swalwell, state epidemiologist with the California Department of Public Health, thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Despite the lockdown restrictions, we're all encouraged to get out for some fresh air. If you head north across the Golden Gate Bridge, you'll find Muir Woods National Monument, known for its towering redwood trees, winding trails, and views of the Pacific Ocean. The old-growth redwood forest was named after naturalist John Muir by President Theodore Roosevelt in 1908. Take a walk through the trees with us for this week's look at something beautiful. You will need reservations to visit. I'm Priya David Clemens. You can reach me on Twitter at Priya D. Clemens, and you can find more of our news coverage at kqed.org/kqed-newsroom. From all of us here at KQED Newsroom, thank you for joining us. Good night.